I'm going to come down here. Can everybody hear me all right? Yeah? It's always a funny question. Those that can't hear me, raise your hand. That means everybody can hear me, right? Hey, listen, again, my name is Shawn Neider. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here with you and to share some thoughts and hopefully, as Brother Waite said, answer some of your questions. Not too many years ago, I was in this very same class at BYU Provo, the Entrepreneurial Lecture Series. And on that campus, they held the class in the Marriott School on the top floor. So I think it's maybe 10th floor. That building was at the time, and probably still is, affectionately referred to as the Great and Spacious Building. Okay, because it's the business school building. And I had the opportunity and the privilege to attend those lectures and really enjoyed listening. I wish I had taken the opportunity to ask more questions myself. But what I want to do today is share just a few ideas of things that I heard there, a few things that I didn't hear there, advice that some of which I wish I had followed better, and some that I think I was wise to have tried to do the best I can to follow. With regards to how I met my wife, my senior year in high school, well, I'm going to back up just a little bit because it'll tell you a little bit about me and how I've done a few things. My senior year in high school, somebody gave me a book, and it was called I Dare You. You might look it up. It's a small book. You can read it in about 5 minutes. And it talked about what success is. It talked about how you get the things that you want in life. And it has a very specific, short challenge. And it says, if you really want something, write it down, and then on a little piece of paper, put it in your wallet, and pull it out 3 times a day and read it. And if you do that, the thing that you want will be yours. Well, it seemed a little simple. There's plenty of examples in the scriptures that we know of where things were too simple for people to follow, and they missed out on blessings. So, look, I'm not too bright, but I can add 1 + 1 and sometimes get 2. So I thought, I'm going to try this. I wrote down 3 things. The first thing I wrote down was I wanted to be able to buy a car because I didn't have a car. I was a senior in high school still driving my mom's car, and that wasn't very cool. Second thing I wanted to do was kiss Pamela Paxman. Okay? Pamela was one of the best looking girls I'd ever met. And every time I got around her, I got tongue tied. The first time I met her, I went, and then I squeezed the soda that I had in my hand so tight that it spilled all over the place. And so I wanted to ask her out and I wanted to kiss her. That was number 2. Number 3 was I wanted to go to Hawaii on vacation with my friends for spring break. Okay? Now back then, the cost of doing that was a lot of money for a high school senior like me, especially one that played sports and didn't have a job. And so these were 3 things that I thought were out of my reach, but that I thought if I wrote down and I read to myself 3 times a day, maybe something would happen. And by the middle of that year, I had earned enough money for the car. I had dated Pamela and kissed her. And I was on my way to spring break in Hawaii with my friends. There were 5 friends, so there were 6 of us. And on this trip to Hawaii, we hit one of the popular spots called the Polynesian Cultural Center. And has anybody heard of it? Has anybody ever been? Okay, if you've been, you know there are different villages. And they teach you different things in different villages about the culture of different islands. In the Tahitian village, one of the things they did was they pulled people up out of the audience to learn a Tahitian dance. And so they pulled up myself and two of my friends, and then three girls randomly, and we learned this dance. And we were terrible, horrible. The girl that I got matched up with, I was so nervous about doing this dance and looking foolish that I didn't really look at her very closely. And so we did the dance, and everyone laughed and politely applauded. And then we sat down. And after we sat down, I did what high school boys do, is I started scanning the crowd for cute girls. And I saw one that I thought was cute. And I said to my buddy, hey, there's one. She's cute. And he said, shut up. And I said, what? I think she's cute. And he says, yeah, that's the girl you just danced with. And I said, oh, well, now she's really cute. And I thought, well, I'm going to say hi to her. But sitting right next to her was a Samoan kid who had to have outweighed me by about 200 pounds. I mean, this guy was massive. In fact, he later became known as Conan. I called him Conan the Barbarian. This guy was huge. And I said, well, I'm going to talk to her. And they said, yeah, good luck with her boyfriend. And long story short is I ran into her again a little bit later over in front of the temple. I thought, well, there's got to be something there. And then later at the bus stop, after the day was over, we were going to ride the bus back to our hotels in Waikiki. And she was at the bus stop. And so I started talking to her there and got to know her just a little bit. We got on the bus. We rode the bus all the way back to Waikiki, changed buses twice together. She was with her parents, by the way, which if you've ever tried to ask somebody out while they're with their parents, that's a fun trick, okay? And so we got off the final bus. We started walking to our hotel, and it turned out her hotel was literally right across the street from mine. And I think they thought we were stalking them or something, but we said goodnight. The next morning, the first thing that happened when I walked out our hotel lobby door was I ran to her again, talked to her again, and then we corresponded a little bit over that next summer. Went to Rick's College together. I went on a mission. She waited for me. And when I got back, we got married. And that's how I met my wife, dancing at the Polynesian Cultural Center. And so Hawaii's been a favorite place of ours for a very, very long time. One of the things that I want to help you understand, though, is this idea of you can get the things that you want in life, and things will work out if you'll make them the foremost thought in your mind, okay? A lot of people have used this idea that we become what we think about. And I've come to realize that every time I've put this into practice, every time it has worked. And so the things that I try to accomplish that are worth accomplishing, I'm able to do if I make those the foremost thought in my mind. After my mission to Japan, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I knew I wanted to start a company. I wanted to be my own boss. Exactly what that meant, I did not know. And how I was going to go about it, I had no idea. And I was in that wonderful stage of not knowing what I didn't know, okay, which was just about everything. I remember in one job interview, somebody handed me a balance sheet and said, tell me something about this company. And I said, looks to me like they have a financial statement. I literally couldn't really say anything. I could say, well, it looks like they have this much cash. And that's about all I could really, understand about it. As I tried to get advice from people about what I should do and how I should go about doing it, I got some really good advice. That this advice was, it doesn't matter what you do in business, whether you are an employee or you own your own company, you really ought to know something about two things. The first thing is accounting. The second thing is marketing. Now, I believe you're either naturally oriented towards left brain or right brain. Okay? You're either good at math or you're good at English. You're either creative or you're analytical. That doesn't mean you can't be some of both or you can't be a lot of both, but my natural inclinations are towards English, art, communication, and those are the things that I don't have to think too much about, that I don't have to practice to be good at. When it came to math, I was horrible. I really struggled with that. For a business minor, I had to take a calculus class at BYU and dropped out after 2 weeks. Okay? It was just not something that I understood very well. So when I got this advice that you should know something about accounting so that you understand how accounting is called the language of business. You got to understand how people speak about companies and what makes a good company and what cash flow is and how it works. And so I force-fed myself accounting. Okay? Now, if you don't have to do that, then I think that's wonderful. I did. But I did it enough that I got very, very good at it. And I have spent most of my career in finance and accounting type roles as a VP of finance or a CFO, raising money, using my natural ability to talk to people, help them understand what is possible in the context of what they want to do, and understanding enough about how transactions work to help them get what they want. At this point in my career, I've written probably a little over 100 business plans, all of which have raised money. Okay? I've raised anywhere from $500, okay, up to many millions of dollars. Okay? The most I've ever raised on a single business plan is $40 million. I worked for Bank of America in their entertainment, media, and high-tech group for about 5 years. And in that position, worked with the largest entertainment media companies in the world. So Steven Spielberg and George Lucas were my clients. Okay? Companies like MGM and Sony, DirecTV were all my clients. The average deal size I worked on in that role and in other roles like that was $300 million. Okay? That was the average deal size. The largest deal I've ever worked on was almost $3 billion. And while I was at Bank of America, I did the largest derivatives transaction in Bank of America history. Okay, derivatives are options, calls and puts, and we lent against those kinds of structures, and we did $1 billion, what's called a costless collar, and took zero risk, and made $50 million in fees. Okay? When you make $50 million and you take zero risk, what's the return? How do you calculate the return percent? You can't. Okay? If the risk is zero, okay, and you earn even $1, the return is infinite. Okay? That's the kind of thing that when you do, the president and CEO of the bank calls you and says, hey, that was a great job. Can you do more of those? Okay? And when I left Bank of America, we were working on a similar one for almost $2 billion, where we would make $150 million in fees. Okay? Why do I tell you that? Is it so that you're impressed? A lot of people, when I say I worked on these big deals, say, wow. And to me, it's unimpressive. Because at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of zeros on a page, none of which were going into my bank account, right? I made a lot of rich people a lot more rich. Okay? I tell you for a couple of reasons. The first is that for someone who really struggled with math, okay, I disciplined myself to the point where I was able to work on and be very effective and successful in highly complex financial transactions. At the end of the day, finance is pretty much add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Okay? If you can do that and calculate percents, do a little time value of money stuff, you can work on the biggest stuff there is. So one of the things that I set out to do was to educate myself in areas that I was weak. The reason I did that was my dad was an entrepreneur, and when I was young, he was very successful, but he didn't understand accounting, and he didn't understand how business works from a legal standpoint, and he was taken advantage of, and he lost everything. And so I set out to educate myself at least enough so that that wouldn't happen to me. And I became pretty good at the math stuff, okay? The other reason I tell you about some of the experiences that I've had is to help you understand that at some point you're going to have to define for yourself what it means to be successful, okay? A lot of people would look at the things that I've done from a career standpoint and say that I've been successful. Other people might look at that and say that I haven't, okay? But I want you to start to think about what success means to you. Earl Nightingale was a guy that was one of the very first guys in the success and motivation industry. He defines success this way, and I like it. That success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. Success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. That means if to you a worthy ideal is to be a teacher, okay, a good to great accounting professor at a special institution of higher learning, okay, if that's what you set out to do and you're progressively realizing that, then you're successful because it's what you want to do. And you'll notice that that has nothing to do with money, nothing to do with making money or what kind of house or car you might have. So part of what I want you to understand is that I defined for myself very early on what success would look like. And as a result, the interesting things that I did in my career before I started a lot of my own companies, I think were interesting and helped me be successful, but were not success in and of themselves. For me, success was, and always has been, to be a good member of the church, to be a good husband, and to be a good father. And anything that gets in the way of that are things that take me away from being successful as I define it. One of the main things that I heard when I was in your chair was, I remember a guy came and spoke to us and he said, be careful about living a life commensurate with your earnings. Okay? What that means is the more you make doesn't necessarily mean that you should spend more. Okay? And he described a situation where he was making $250,000 a year and hated his job. And a friend came to him and offered him a job for $100,000 a year. Now, $100,000 a year is still a very good job. Okay? How many of you in here would take a $100,000 a year job right now without asking what it was? Some of us would still do that, okay? What do you mean? Somebody's going to pay me $100,000 a year? Where do I sign up? Right? The situation he described was interesting because what he said was, as the $100,000 a year was actually ideal for me. I would love to do it. The problem is that if I quit my $250,000 a year job to make $100,000, I would lose my house, and I would lose my car, and pretty much everything else. Because I spend a lot more than $100,000 a year. And cutting back is not as easy as you would think. One thing that's really important to understand is that assets are soft. Debts are hard. Okay, what do we mean by that? Assets, the value of assets fluctuates. It goes up and down over time, and it can go fairly quickly, right? Look at the value of a home. The value of a home will fluctuate as the market fluctuates. So the value of that asset is soft. Debts are hard. By that we mean, once you have a loan for $250,000, it doesn't fluctuate with the market. Okay? So if you buy a $300,000 house and put a $250,000 loan against it, and the value of the home falls to $100,000, how much do you owe? How much? The same. $250,000. That's what we mean by debts are hard. And once you lock yourself in, you're locked in, subject to some market conditions. That was one of the really good pieces of advice that I wish I'd followed just a little bit better. Okay, it was not just to live within your means, but to live in such a way that you have freedom. There's a book that I'd recommend to you. It's called Rich on Any Income. Okay, to be rich isn't a function of how much you make, it's a function of how much you, what? It's how much you keep. Okay? It doesn't matter how much you make. What matters is how much you keep. And freedom is a function of the amount of money that you have at your disposal that gives you options. Okay? What's interesting is in a career, and this is true with a company, if you start a company or whether it's a career, it doesn't matter. What happens is in the early days is, let's say you start out and you're making $20,000. Well, you're always looking at that next opportunity that's going to get you to $30,000, right? Most of us aren't going to settle for 20, so we're looking for 30. And when we get there, what do? We look for an opportunity to get us to 40, and then to 50, and so on and so on, until we get to some kind of ceiling. Now, sometimes the ceiling's real and sometimes it's not, but let's say that it's real. Let's say that now you're making this much money. And for what you do, it's kind of the upper limit, give or take a little bit. But you're not going to jump from this to something substantially higher, okay? You've kind of maxed out. The interesting that happens is when you're in this process, it's highly motivating. It's exciting. You're looking for opportunities, okay? You're not worried or stressed as much because, I can still go find that next opportunity. Once you get to this point, okay, and you realize it, your mindset can shift if you have not created real financial freedom for yourself, okay? Because you no longer start thinking about what that next step up is. You start thinking about what that next step down could look like, okay? You start thinking, well, I'm making really good money. What if the economy turns and I lose my job? And you start acting out of fear and anxiety and worry and frustration, which isn't freedom no matter how much money you make. Okay? Some of the richest people and wealthiest, okay, there's a difference between being rich and being wealthy. Some of the richest people I know and some of the wealthiest people I know don't make very much money. One of the wealthiest people I know has been a vice principal at a high school for 45 years. And he's really rich because of the freedom that his wealth provides for him. I know people that make tens of millions of dollars a year who are slaves, literally slaves, to their jobs, to their debt, to their obligations, okay? So it's really important to think about for yourself what success means. After I'd done a lot of, I went to work for the bank, not because I thought I was going to start my own bank, but because I wanted to get enough experience so that I understood accounting, I understood marketing, and that I could be more successful. Plus, nothing jumped out at me. You know, weddings.com just didn't seem like the kind of thing I could get excited about getting up for every day. One of the things in consulting and banking and other businesses like that that's really cool is you get to see virtually every kind of business in every stage there is. And you get to talk to their owners and their managers, and I mean, it's an education like you can't believe. You understand how to manage risk and you know, what it means to try to grow these companies. And so I spent a lot of years doing that, but at a certain point, I knew I was ready to go start my own company. I started a visual effects company called Sandman Studios. I started that literally out of the garage with a couple of guys. I managed the risk by working full-time and funding their activities until there was enough for me to come on board full-time. And our clients were Disney, DreamWorks, the biggest entertainment media companies in the world. And we did visual effects and other creative media, 3D modeling and animation. You know, we did stuff for Pirates of the Caribbean. We did stuff for little movies. Some of them are older, so you might not know, but Armageddon, Terminator, those kinds of movies. We did the first full-length feature film in full HD. Okay, up until that time, things were shot in like half HD, and our movie came out the same time that Star Wars Episode 1 came out. Episode 1 had 1,000 visual effects shots in it. Ours had 1,300 in it. Their budget was a few $100 million, and ours was $5 million. Okay? And our visual effects looked like we spent $5 million. Okay? But we got a lot of recognition, and it helped us land some really cool projects. One thing I learned in that situation is that payroll comes every 2 weeks, whether you want it to or not. Okay? And when you're funding a company, if you sometimes no growth or slow growth can kill a company, right? Nothing kills a company faster than too much growth, because growth requires cash. And running a company is a lot like your personal life. You have to live within your means with enough cushion that when things don't go the way you think they are going to, it's not the end of your cash. Okay? And we grew that company to 22 full-time employees, and we kept about 14 or 15 freelancers busy at all times. So we had about 40 people that we were employing full-time. And payroll comes every 2 weeks, whether you want it to or not. And I like to describe that period as the best of times and the worst of times. I like to describe that period, for me personally, where I was wearing every hat there was to wear, as a period where I felt like a jack of all trades and master of none. Okay, you're spread thin. You've got too many irons in the fire, so many irons in the fire that none of them can heat up. And so you have to learn to be focused. You have to learn to be conservative and aggressive at the same time, and you have to learn how to walk this kind of tightrope when it comes to managing things. And it was really a roller coaster ride. In the 5 years, 5 times 50 is how many? 250. So we had 250 payrolls. How many of those do you think, they come on Fridays usually, how many times during that period do you think that on Thursday afternoon or Friday morning, I didn't know how I was going to make payroll? I mean, no idea. If I told you it was over 100 times, would that surprise you? Okay. It was about 130 times. And in that period of times, how many times do you think I missed payroll? Not once. Not once. Now, is that because I'm smart? I'm a good manager? Of course. Smart as they come. No, I tell you, this 5-year period was the best of times or the worst of times. I loved working and running this company. And it was really challenging. It was really difficult because of the market, because of the economy, because of customers always wanting more. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. I wouldn't trade that experience for anything, because when I would fall down on my knees and ask my Heavenly Father to help me and commit myself to being a good guy, committed to what I defined as success, committed to helping other people, and committed to helping my employees feed their families and pay their bills. It's one thing to worry about where your next paycheck's coming from. It's another thing to worry about how you're going to pay 40 other people. Okay? But every time I did that, my Heavenly Father found a way for me to be successful. And for that reason alone, I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. Now, at the end of the day, after 5 years, we sold the company for $300% more than we had invested into it over the 5-year period, and a little over 900% more than we had originally invested. Okay? So, by the world's definition, we started a good company that was successful, and we're able to make our money and then some back. And I tell you, if it hadn't ended up that way, I would have still felt successful. Because all the success that the world sees in the world, okay? You did $1 billion deal. You started a company that you sold for a lot of money. All of those things are not part of my definition of success. The happiest days in my life were the day I got married and the day that my kids were born. And the hardest day of my life was the day I took my missionary tag off. That was like the hardest day of my life, not knowing that I wasn't going to be a missionary anymore. And the day I sold my company was a good day. But it doesn't make my top 5 or maybe even my top 10. I've started or helped start other companies that have done equally well or better. Okay, one company that I was instrumental in helping start was a company called Workfront. You can look them up. Workfront is a project management software company. Okay, when I joined the company and wrote their first business plan, we raised $7 million. Over the next 18 months, we hired about 180 employees, which is a lot, okay, to add in a short period of time and get them up to speed and functional. When I left, when I first got there, the company was worth about $40 million. When I left, it was worth about $300 million, and today it's worth close to $1 billion. A lot of people would look at that and say there is an entrepreneurial success story. And I think in many ways it is. But what I'll tell you is that there were people at that company whose definition of success was, I want to be wealthy and I don't care at what expense to other people. Okay? And they really made other people miserable as long as they got what they wanted. And so that doesn't meet my definition of success, even though it's worth a lot of money today. I'm going to end on kind of one thought here. Who knows who Jerry Seinfeld is? Never heard of him, huh? This is one of the quotes I like. He says, "Life is truly a ride. We're all strapped in and no one can stop it. When the doctor slaps your behind, he's ripping your ticket, and away you go. As you make each passage from youth to adult to maturity, sometimes you put your arms up and scream. Sometimes you just hang on to that bar in front of you. But the ride is the thing. I think the most you can hope for at the end of life is that your hair's messed up, you're out of breath, and you can say you didn't throw up." Okay? I like that. I like that. I think the ride is the thing. Okay? Mario Andretti, anybody know who he is? Formula One racer. Okay, he's a race car driver. He said, and this, when you're an entrepreneur and you're running a company, you're wearing all the hats, you can relate to this. But he says, if you're not going so fast that the wheels could come off at any time, you're not going fast enough. That's what it feels like a lot of times. But if you can do that and be true to your definition of success, and hopefully that includes being true to your Heavenly Father, because that's the first and great commandment. And the second one is you're doing something that will benefit the lives of other people. If you're doing those two things, then that's a pretty good definition, and one that, in my experience, will always work out. And if you'll write that down and you read it to yourself 3 times a day, I promise you'll get it. Because that's a worthy ideal. And I just want to bear my testimony that it's worked for me every time. And I'm grateful for the opportunity I had to be in your shoes, and grateful for the opportunity to come and speak to you today. And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Amen. Questions? Any? Yeah?
You were saying that out of the 250 times you had to make payroll, 130 or so, you weren't sure how you were going to do it. What were some of the, from the business side, what were some of the sacrifices that you had to make in order to pay your employees, if there were?
Yeah, it's a good question. Sometimes it meant borrowing money, personally, okay? Over the course of that period, I did that quite a few times. I had to be careful that I didn't overextend myself, okay? Sometimes it meant bringing some money in from an investor. Most of the time, it has what's affectionately referred to as dialing for dollars, okay? Most of the time, I wasn't sure if we were going to make it. It wasn't because we weren't profitable, okay? It's because of cash flow, okay? And if you don't understand the difference between a cash flow statement and an income statement, then that's a homework assignment. You've got to understand the difference. An income statement can show that you're profitable, and you can run out of money. Okay, you can go broke, and it's a function of time. It's when the cash comes in and when it goes out. So a lot of times what would happen is, people owed us money, they just hadn't paid. So on Thursdays and Fridays, we dialed for dollars. And we said to our clients, we've made this much progress, we need a payment. Okay, and those payments would more often than not help us meet that next payroll. But, a sacrifice isn't really a sacrifice if you're happy to do it. And borrowing money was never something I wanted to do or enjoyed doing, but I was happy to do it because I believed in what we were doing. In 5 years, I took 4 days of vacation. And it never bothered me at all because I enjoyed what I was doing and I believed in our mission as a company. Other questions? Yeah?
You mentioned at the beginning that every goal you put at the forefront of your mind you accomplish. And I'm curious what kind of things you do to keep a goal at the forefront of your mind so that you accomplish it.
It's really magical. It's really magical. I read it 3 times a day. And that's it. I mean, it really is it. And it just proves what is said by, has been said for, ever. You are what you think about. It's hard to read something 3 times a day and not think about it in between or enough for you to take steps towards its accomplishment. I can tell you that of the things that I haven't written down and read to myself 3 times a day, I've accomplished none of them. Okay? Anything worthwhile that I've accomplished, I've used that method.
Well, one question on that. So what are your 3 goals now? And do you have lived by a principle of how you save money? Like, if you this is how much I'm going to spend on my savings each month or whatever?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I'll answer the second part of it first. We're counseled to save at least, how much?
10%.
How much? How much are we counseled to save? At least?
10%.
10%, thank you. The people that I've seen be successful have saved more than 10%. The people that I've seen really be wealthy have saved 20% or more. And so I try to, most people say this is how much I make, this is how much I'm going to spend, and whatever's left over I'll put in the bank. Personally, I try to make it so that whatever I spend, there will be at least 10 to 20% left over, including things I don't plan for. Okay? So, I'll just tell you over the last 8 months since I've been here, I've saved close to 45% of everything I've made. And now don't get excited, 45% of nothing is still nothing. What I don't want you to think is it's 45% of a huge number, so it's easy to do. Okay? I've made certain sacrifices to be here, and that include lower income than I'm used to. Okay? And so saving 45% of that is a bigger accomplishment than if I was making as much as I wanted and had very little expenses. Does that make sense? Okay? My 3 goals right now, my main goal is to be the best seminary teacher I can be. I teach early morning seminary, and that's one that I love to do, and I want to be the best I can be at that. The second one is I want to put X number of dollars in savings over the next 12 months. Okay, I'm already well ahead of schedule on that. And the third thing is I want to go back to school. And I want to become a therapist that helps people with addictions. You're never too late to start over. And so part of my savings goal is to pay for that and do that for the next 15 years or so. Yeah.
Has fear ever a factor to you? I know it might be reiterating what you're talking about, like reading it 3 times a day, but how did you overcome anything?
Okay. This is a really important question. If you've got 2 minutes, you ought to stay. Okay? How do you overcome fear? You are what you become, you are what you think about. So if you think fearful thoughts, you are fearful. Okay? So you have to control what you think about. Now, that's not very easy. If I say to you, don't think about elephants, what was the first thing you thought of? You thought of elephants. So if elephants represent fear or temptation or anything else that you don't want to think about, you cannot say to yourself, I'm not going to think about that. I'm not going to think about elephants all day. It doesn't work. You cannot not think about something. The way to control your thoughts is to replace what you don't want to think about with something that you do want to think about. Okay? So if the opposite of elephants is zebras, then I need to spend my time thinking about zebras, not thinking about elephants. Does it make sense? If you fill your mind with good things, this is why the gospel is so ingenious. Okay? What are we taught? We're taught to pray and read our scriptures. If a bad thought comes into your head, you do what? Sing a hymn. Okay? If you fill your head with unfearful thoughts, with positive thinking all day long, you do not have time to be afraid. Okay? Because fear isn't real anyway. Okay? Thanks, you guys. I'm around.